All right. Morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Great to see you all.
Yay.
Our opening question for today, and thanks for joining in person and over Zoom. Always so wonderful to see you all and learn together. Our opening question is the classic love of work versus love of family tension. And yeah, not as light as some of our other opening questions, but if you have in your experience or like any advice or what has helped for you when broaching that tension of having a deep, all-consuming love of work, but also a deep, all-consuming love of family, and how you try to balance.
I read ahead. And I might have to stop coming to classes.
Is that right? Why?
It's been too much time in class.
Good. That's right. So Ron,
Classes.
yes. Yeah. So Ron, speaking from as a deep lover of learning, right? Somebody who is always looking for more classes and ways to learn and grow. So good. So you have that deep passion. Good. Any other? David, thanks.
So I learned this from Chuck Radner a lot of years ago.
Oh my God.
And if you can be in a position to do this, I guess that's part of it. But he said, family first, community second, business third. Business is to make the money to support the community and the family.
Got it. So family first, community second, business third. And yet you need that business to support the other two. So it's
To say that. We'll have to put work first.
right.
That's why I prefaced it by saying, if you can be fortunate enough to be in a position.
Right. So that's interesting. Is it a privilege to be able to prioritize family? Right. Okay, good.
I mean, if you're young and you're working and you're building up career,
Mhm.
all your energy in your career, yes, you love your family, but you're working really hard. Support your family. It's a yin yang. It's
A yin yang. Good. And right. So there's sort of that also chronology that you're bringing up that, okay, well, first I need to prioritize family. I'm young and building up, and then I'll get to a point where sorry, did I say that right? First prioritize work, business, and then I'll get to a point where I can really prioritize family because maybe that's retirement or whatever that is. But after I have built something, I can then reap the fruits of that harvest. Okay.
It's not about family versus learning. It's about learning versus learning, because especially since the pandemic, there have been so many opportunities online to learn. So I think one needs to know what is it they'd like to focus on, which areas do they want to imbibe or take in that learning, and tons of options, as we all know. And I'm here today simply because I'm very selective, and this is phenomenal. Your classes are wonderful. It's a matter of being discriminating. You can't, there is only so much time.
Right.
Time in a day and time on the planet.
Right.
And if people of the book are supposed to learn, we need to be selective.
Mhm.
Rabbi.
That's right. So okay. So you bring up a lot. First, when you said it's not work versus learning versus work, it's learning versus learning. I thought where you were going to go with that is that everything is a form of learning. So it's sort of a false dichotomy to say that you're either learning or you're working, because or even family, that's also learning, right? Learning, everything is learning in a way. But then you mentioned just how we budget our time, right? It is a very precious, time is the most precious gift. And how do we spend that? How do we spend it at work? Do we spend it at home? How do we be discerning in spending our most valuable resource, which is time? Okay, come on in, make yourself a plate. There's plenty of room. There's some chairs over there. Yeah. Or I can scooch over if you want.
You're very,
Sheila, go ahead.
but you can try to incorporate.
Say that again. If you're agile, oh, you incorporate family,
There are some cases.
like maybe work at the same place as your spouse. Yeah.
family.
Right.
You know, you can incorporate, like if you are a rabbi, you bring your kid and you show them.
He brings his wife in.
And she brings me. Yeah. Right.
And, you know, and show them what you're doing.
Mhm.
I mean, you can't always do this.
Right. So that's really interesting, right? So bringing your kids to work and having them be a part of the fabric of it, letting them see what it's like.
They'll see where you work. I think
Mhm.
seeing what people are doing,
Yeah,
then you can discuss it with the kids. You can't discuss it if you're not,
so, right, and
if actually a kid, I mean, it
Right.
depends. What is a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old?
yeah, no, it builds connection, bonding. What you're saying is making me think of, and everybody welcome back Eric and Shira, yay. So glad you guys are here. Welcome, welcome. Feel free to grab a plate and join us. Yeah. I have more source sheets too, if you need. There's another sheet here. But what you're making me think of, what you're saying is making me think of one of my rabbis from home, Rabbi Ed Feinstein, used to say that he would his daughter, he's a rabbi, a big synagogue, right? And his daughter growing up, his oldest, would feel really resentful that daddy wouldn't be home, right? He would be, and one of the ways that he tried to bridge that tension was that he once brought her with him to a funeral and brought her with him to the wedding. And she would see, oh, this is why daddy isn't home. This is what that, and that doesn't solve everything. I'm not saying that like that makes everything better once you know, but she was then incorporated into the work and she would love, and congregants would love when she would come and get to know her. But that brings, if we're talking from personal experience about being a rabbi and we are starting our family, and it is not so easy, right? It is very difficult to want, on one hand, your family to be so enmeshed in the community and for the community to be so enmeshed in family, but also to build healthy boundaries to say, I need to not be at something important because I want to go to my kid's t-ball game, and so it's not so easy, but one strategy certainly is to try to incorporate the two, though that brings conflicts as well. Any other? Yes.
So when my children were at Agnon School, now Mandel, I decided that I was going to study at the College of Jewish Studies, which was in the building next to it. That allowed me to have lunch with my children, to interact with them, and to be learning while they were learning. And it was because I had sort of flexible work time that I was able to.
That's all
Very lucky.
we're flexible
But
and flexible bosses too.
Yeah.
But I do bring up another point though, that it all depends on your goal. In other words, some people say, well, I have to work, I have to work, I have to work. Well, yes, but there are limits to how far you have to go. Everybody gets very materialistic in saying I have to keep,
Right.
have to keep rising. I mean, if we look at an example of say a church group that goes every Sunday and they're singing together and their whole families and such, they are not necessarily wealthy people that are taking all this time to do other things in the community. They've decided this is what they want to do.
Beautiful. So on one hand, and then I want to get to Zoom. I see your hands, Bob and Nelson. Thank you. This insatiable, unending cycle of work, right? And material gain. It's never enough. So at what point is it actually enough? And we can trick ourselves into thinking that if I just get here, it'll be enough. But then it sort of cycles and it never is enough. But then also that idea of, I had it and I lost it. That ultimately, no, it's gone. Maybe it'll come back. But okay, good contribution. Okay, Helena and then on Zoom.
So not everybody is so lucky, first of all. Not everybody had the resources to go to work and have somebody stay with the children. It's one thing. And some people are not lucky to have family to help out. The other thing is certain professions don't allow you to be flexible.
That's right.
Those things. So you have a lot of choices to make.
Right.
Not only this, if a woman decides to stay home while the children are small, she might never go back to work. And I always had to fight against this notion that women go to medical school just to find a husband and never practice.
Right.
So there are a lot of things intermingled. It's not such a simple thing.
Good. So, and I'm also remembering what I wanted to say, which is a good counter or Helena brings a good counter to that notion, the notion of, well, somebody lying on their deathbed and nobody ever says, I wish I spent more time in the office, right? But at the same time, you have what Helena's talking about, which is like, not everyone is so privileged or lucky to be able to prioritize community or family or whatever their other love is outside of work. But also the challenge that women face of, well, first of all, where does motherhood factor into this? How do you interrupt the trajectory of a career and then to have a family and then jump back in, right? It's very rare that you can, after all that upset momentum or everything you studied for, and then you put that on pause and then you try, as opposed to just being able to go straight from your studies to work and just build and build and build. Good. There's so many more comments. Let's go Zoom and then more in the room, and then we got to get into the text. So let's go, Bob. I saw your hand first.
In 1968, when I was a senior in pharmacy school and getting engaged to Barbara, we had a discussion of, are you prepared to continue with this relationship knowing that I'm going to work every other weekend, every other holiday, every other everything? And when we would get an invitation to something, the first thing we do is get the calendar and go on, off, on, off, on, off. I'm off. We can go. So that was our life, and she had to be prepared for that. And we had the discussion up front so that we wouldn't have the conflict, because getting off involves switching with the other guy and was he available and all that kind of stuff. So
right. But that you're bringing up the importance of communication, right, and advanced planning and trying to devise a system and communication with your significant other that makes it easier, or at least if there's transparency and you're in communication, it's a partnership, not just I have to defer to my work schedule no matter what.
Right.
Nelson.
I mumbled to myself while I'm muted. So now I'll stop mumbling. Don't think that you can work and then eventually get around to discovering your kids.
Right.
If you're a stranger to them when you're old, you're probably going to be a stranger to them, period.
Right.
You need to develop that relationship as you go along, even if you can't spend as much time with it as you like. As a teacher, one of the things I was able to do was I had to take the kids lots of different places. I would always bring papers to grade with me, and I couldn't always engage in their activities, but I could at least be the chauffeur and sometimes the lifeguard. And so you can find ways to do things.
Right.
The other thing I highly recommend, I used to cook Sunday dinner. And we'd watch television. I'd make pizza, and we would. It was a family thing. We all worked together, and that's, it's not separate. A number of separate people. It's got to be interlaced. But
nice.
Please, the one thing I really think is important: don't think you can put it off.
Yes.
Because off never comes. On never comes.
Right. That's making me think of the song "Father and Son," Harry Chapin, right? That at first the father doesn't have time, and then at the end the son doesn't have time. Once the father's ready, so they missed each other. And the other thing you're making me think of is like Shabbat, right? Rabbi Heschel says you can only make sacred time, right? And having your sacred time, whether it's Shabbat dinner or Sunday making pizza, and this is the time that is family time as much as you can make, or your community time, or your time with friends, whatever it is. We just need this sacred structures and time. A couple more comments because I saw hands in the room. Then we're going to dive into the text, so we have enough time with the text. Go ahead.
So you've already just said it, but part of it's Shabbat, part of it's the whole weekend, and part of it is the so-called family vacation, which, why do so many people, whether they travel or not, spend an intense amount of time at the same time as everybody else is? I guess that's why, because that's when the kids are off in school.
Right.
And if you can arrange your vacation time to coincide with that, and not everybody can, then you could at least spend that time together.
Right. Lovely. Yes.
Oh, while my husband was living, and we moved to Cleveland, I was able to get a studio job, but the thing that I worked out was that, I would be home to take my kids and have lunch with them and then drive back to work. And if I took them to Hebrew school, I took them, my husband would pick them up. But when my husband died, all bets were off. And then when I started teaching, with the teaching, I had a fixed schedule. The students would notice if I wasn't there. And then I became department head, and it kept demanding more and more of my time, to the point where each time it was up, who was going to be department head. And I always ended up being department head. And my children said, Mom, tell them you're not going to do it anymore. Mom, tell them you're not going to do it anymore. I wasn't able to do it. So I was able to back off and let somebody else do it. But it was very much push-pull.
Yeah, I don't think anybody has the secret recipe or answer. And I think something is gained in everybody offering their own insights, advice, and experience. And there's something in here that, is so rich and helpful. And yet, as we can see, like there is no clear answer on how to strike this balance. But I want to turn to the text now. So this comes, the first one, I'm going to share it on Zoom, titled this session, Rabbinic Love Triangles. You can guess why, or it'll become apparent to you pretty immediately. We're going to dive into the Talmud first. This is from Ketubot. And the discussion they're having is, we know, right, the Ketubot, the Ketubah is a marital contract.
Yeah.
And originally very, very forward thinking in its time, which is to guarantee that and in this case, we're talking about, heterosexual marriage, right? That the man owes the woman certain things, right? There's intimacy, food and clothing, right? Shelter, and the things that you cannot deprive your wife of. And so they say, but the Talmud is filling in the gaps of, that becomes really tricky when you factor in different jobs and work schedules, right? Like what about sailors who are away for long periods of time? What constitutes depriving your spouse, your wife, of intimacy, of marital relations, of sex, right? Or what if you are a laborer, or what if you are, right? Different jobs that have you out for certain times. What is a realistic expectation that, how long can you go basically? And it's okay to not, be intimate with your wife while you're away at work. So let's dive in. Does somebody want to read the Mishnah stated? Go for it.
The Mishnah stated for Seder, the set interval for conjugal relations is once every 6 months. Rabbi Eliezer Rav Barona said that Rav said is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rav Adabar Ahaba said that Rav said. This is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer, but the rabbis say students may leave their homes to study Torah for as long as 2 or 3 years without permission from their wives. Rav said the sages relied on Rabbi Adabar Ahaba's opinion and performed an action like this themselves. But the results were sometimes fatal. This is as it is related about Rav Rahumi, who would commonly study before Rav in Mahoza. He was accustomed to come back to his home every year on the eve of Yom Kippur. One day, he was particularly engrossed in the halakha. He was studying and did not go home. His wife was expecting him that day and continually said to herself, now he's coming, now he is coming. But in the end, he did not come. She was distressed by this, and a tear fell from her eye. At that exact moment, Rav Rahumi was sitting on the roof. The roof collapsed under him. He died.
Interesting story here, and a lot of elements to unpack. Number one is, let's just do some background on who all these rabbis are at the beginning. So there are two opinions regarding what did Rav say, right? That the sort of the structure of this text begins with what did Rav say? And there are two opinions. One is that Rav said we go by Rabbi Eliezer, which is that the halacha is 6 months. You can go as much as 6 months, like sailors, right? And that's the opinion of Rav Barona. Then you have a second opinion. This is Rav Ada bar Ahava. Interesting name. We'll get back to it. And that second opinion is that the 6 months thing was Rabbi Eliezer's statement, but the rabbis say that more time is okay, 2 to 3 years of your students, right? So it actually isn't the halacha, like opinion one says, that you can only go 6 months and no more. But that was just Rabbi Eliezer's statement, but you could actually go longer. Interesting that we have two names here that are love, right? Rav Ada bar Ahava, and then Rav Rahumi, which in Aramaic means love. They're also in Hebrew, it comes from Rechem. Rechem is womb, right?
You mean mercy?
Rechem is mercy, like Rachamim, Av HaRachamim. God is sovereign of mercy, right? Father mercy. And Rechem is womb, because when we think of love, or we think of the ultimate place of love and compassion, that's the womb, which is this protective, intimate, totally giving of one person place, or two, or 3 or 4, I guess. Okay, go ahead.
About the saying that do not make a woman to cry, for God counts her tears against you.
Exactly. So good. You are seizing on the tier, the single tier. It's interesting that it's a single tier. And one thing is that there is this statement that it says, this is where it gets a little bit, this is a wonderful tradition, it's a very old tradition. So there are certain things that would strike us as moderns a little bit sexist. This is one that women are easier to cry. So if you bring your wife to cry, that God is very sensitive to that. That will hold that against you. Jackie's saying, go ahead, Elliot.
I listened to this, I'm reminded of our wedding, which was in a very Orthodox shul, and they went on and on in Hebrew. Half of it I didn't understand, but the part that I do remember, which was expressed in English, was about the sexual thing, plus something else. If in fact the marriage wouldn't work out, I'd have to give my wife so many cows and so many horses. And I said, thank God I don't know cows or horses. I can get out of it.
You're exempt.
Fortunately, that didn't happen.
Right. Good. Yes, Ruth.
Questions. Is Rav Ada bar Ahava, is there such a rabbi, or is it a nickname, or?
I think, so that's interesting. I think it's his name. I don't, Rav Ada, the son of Ahava, I don't think.
But Ahava would be.
Love.
Right.
He's the son of they give his mother's name because his either the convert or whatever.
So I'm not certain that it's his mother's name and not his father's name. Because there were so many rabbis in this, I did the background on many of them. I didn't do the background on these, so I can't definitively tell you where their histories, but I will look it up, and that's a good lesson not to skimp on any other rabbi.
So did you choose it because of Valentine's Day?
I didn't want to say yes because it's not a holiday that we necessarily celebrate as Jews, but yes, it was inspired by.
Celebrate the other one, Lent, next Wednesday.
Yes, so it was thematic in that way. Right, be fruitful and multiply. Right, but there is another halachic concept, which is osek b'mitzvah, patur mina mitzvah, which is that the one who is busying themselves with mitzvot are exempt from other mitzvot. And I think this is where we now get into like modern Israeli and Haredi debates about if, like, we don't have to serve in the military, which may be like this mitzvah to defend our people and our country, because we are busy with another very important mitzvah, which is Torah study. And it's through our Torah study that we are protecting our country and safeguarding our tradition and so forth. So I think that is sort of, they're saying yes, because you're saying, yes, of course, it's so simple. Of course, you're supposed to be with your spouse and right, be fruitful and multiply. But I think they would say, but we are so busy with something that is also important.
Yeah, but you might still fall off the roof.
Say,
You might still, the roof might still collapse from underneath you. It's not a-
yes, I heard that one.
given
I heard that
it's
one.
safe.
Good, right, yes. Priorities. Had one, but
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm thinking, you mentioned the Haredi that want to study. That wasn't one of the three reasons why you were excused from going to war. It was because you hadn't consummated with your wife, it was because you just planted a vineyard, because you just, I forgot what the other one was, the house.
right, the house. Right, so good. So Ron is bringing up a verse that there is in times of war.
I mean, and that's Torah. That's not even.
That's Torah, right? That you're supposed to turn to your soldiers and say, who here has just been married but not consummated their relationship? And if soldiers raise their hands, say, go back home and go to your spouse. And then who here has planted a vineyard but not yet enjoyed its fruits? And they raise their hands and go back home and enjoy your vineyard. Who here is, dedicated a house but not yet, right? Go to your house. And then who here is deathly afraid? Who here is too afraid? And then they also could go back. And the rest were the people who would go in, which I always love. It always.
And one of those was not study.
Right, right. And he's saying, but if you didn't study, you wouldn't know that. But
Excused from taking the final because I'm a bride.
Nice, right? It's this where we want to prioritize this, and how tragic would it be, right? And unfortunately, we're reading this all the time, right? When Rabbi Hal every Shabbat gives the stories of the soldiers, how many we see they had just gotten engaged, or they were, affianced, they were engaged, and just how heartbreaking. I mean, it's always heartbreaking, but those stories of, oh God, you had your whole life ahead of you. Oh, you would just, and now leave a widow, right, instead of a bride, right? So it's, but so a couple more things I want to elevate in this story before we move on, which is why is it that, okay, first I heard somebody say, how did he get on the roof? Or maybe it was Asa, what's the deal with the roof? And I think Rabbi Alex answered. So do you want to go ahead and answer for everybody? No, go for it.
Stories in the Talmud about rabbis on roofs, strangely enough.
Good word, yeah.
I think roofs look different and we're imagining them, imagine something flat rather than something slanted. And a ladder easily enough to get up to the roof. That was, you'll find it in lots of stories. It's not this inaccessible place. And you even have, in the Torah itself, right? You have this guardrail that we're meant to put, around the, right? To prevent people from falling. So obviously it's this place where people spend time in some way.
Good. Good. And that's one of Rabbi Alex's favorite texts. Sheila says, and Rabbi Akiva was on the roof. About that. You want me? No, that he had such a thirst for learning, such a love for learning. And there was at that time, there was a guard, like a bouncer at the Midrash. Hillel or Akiva?
That was Akiva. So
it was Akiva when he can.
Hillel.
It was Hillel. Okay. The skylight.
That's
right.
Too much.
Right. So Hillel wasn't let into the Beit Midrash, and he so thirsted for learning that he would try to peer through the skylight. And he froze. It was winter, and he froze. And they saw him, Shemayel of Talion, right? They heat him by the fireplace, and they let him in. But they broke Shabbat to heat him up, and
Studied late. With his wife for like 10 years, 20 years.
well, that was Akiva because he was at 40, and she really funded his studies because she was well. It was Hillel on the roof. I mixed them up too just now, but Hillel was on the roof. But yeah, there was a fiddler too at one point. Yeah, it's all.
That was more recent.
Yeah, good. So I just want to return to this for a moment. So the roof is also important because there's a metaphor here, right? We read this Midrash or stories to live by. The whole class is that we're trying to apply a literary lens to this and see the stories in here. In rabbinic literature, Beito, his house, is synonymous with his wife. Wife and house are analogized. So there is something very telling here when the roof collapses, when the bait, so to speak, collapses, he dies, right? It's not that she dies, but her tear and the house, the roof falling, collapsing at the same time is very significant, right? They're intimately connected, not just etymologically or metaphorically, but right. So the tear and the roof collapsing, that connection. And the question of what sustains the bite, right? That goes back to we're gonna return to here at the end, but this idea that what sustains the house is the house. First of all, is the house your own house or your family or your friends or your community? Is the house Israel, right? And so this discussion of what sustains it, is it the way we treat one another? Is it the importance of studying, so important that you are exempted from military service, right? This question of what sustains the house and keeps it from collapsing. And then just a couple more things just by way of background. So we've studied Rabbi Eliezer in a different context of a tier with the Tanur of Achnai. And so he was like this jug that didn't spill any water until he was excommunicated and they finally get him to cry, right? Rav, 3rd century Babylonia, he's an Amora. He was a head of yeshiva in Sura. These are the Babylonian academies, the yeshivot. And Rava, 4th century Babylonian Amora, head of yeshiva in Mechoza. Which then when Pumbedita, the yeshiva at one point is like sort of like transferred to his in Mechoza. And that's enough for context there. But okay, so we've touched on all the elements except for Yom Kippur. Why is it his habit to go back home on the eve of Yom Kippur of all days?
Yeah, because you can't pass it.
The one day you can't have sex. So he's really not treating his wife well. He sort of has, I'll just say real quick that you can make the argument that halachically he is observing halacha in the sense that, right, he's got these statements backing him. He knows that he's got to go home at a certain amount of time. He does, but he's working around the law and subverting it by going on Yom Kippur so that he can't actually have sex. And at this day, he's breaking halacha because he was so engrossed in Torah study that he forgot, or he didn't go home. One more thing about the roof is that I think for him also, like, he is feeling particularly holy today, right? It's the eve of Yom Kippur and he is studying on the roof, maybe also being closer to the heavens. Like, I think for him, he is engrossed and feeling all this sense of deep holiness, but that is totally removed from holiness found in family life or community. Go ahead.
Yeah, what we're talking about is a system of values and priorities that I've wondered for a long time. What about yesterday was Valentine's Day.
Mm-hmm.
What about the concept of mutual love, keeping that house together?
Right.
Does that appear in the holy literature, in Midrashic literature?
Yes, it does.
When did love show up in our literature? Does it ever show up?
Well, for one thing, the very heart, literally the middle of Torah is love your neighbor as yourself, right? It's literally the center of Torah. But I also think I would argue that this text is getting at what you're saying. Like, I think you could find what you're looking for in this text, not because of the exemplary behavior of our rabbis, but because of what they didn't do, right? I think this story in our text is cherished and passed down, not always for what is inherent in it, but also what it's teaching against. Any more comments? Any more before we move on?
Yeah, well, Michal, he actually was in love with Solomon,
Mm-hmm.
but Michal gave her to somebody else, which made her very sad. Ultimately, they had a falling out because of his dancing, but that's a different story.
Right, with David. Yeah, right. So this idea of, right, but we also see romantic love a couple times with falling off the donkey with Jacob and Rachel. Are you talking about Elkanah and Hannah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm better to you than 10 sons, right? Right. So there is love there. There's the Jacob working for 7 years, but it seemed to him like a day because of his love. Go ahead. Yeah.
Say, you know, there's a chapter unit in marriage, and an important thing to say was that, you know, all of these examples of love in the Torah are generally exceptions to the rule, right? And that's why I think we look for that in Jewish literature. We say, oh, we're people all about this because it's here this one time or these 2 times. And that's not necessarily true. Why did people get married in biblical times? Why did people, you know, until however many years ago, people were getting married for many different reasons and, you know, still do. And that there are all of these built-in safeguards because there are important reasons why people get married aside from love, and hopefully love becomes a part of it. But it's an interesting thing to think about.
Right. So there's tradition, right? And obligation in the sense of chiyuv. It's not about your own personal love and there are greater things that we are loyal to and have allegiance to. And that's what we need to look out for and consider. And I'm thinking of Fiddler on the Roof when they turn to each other and sing, "Do you love me?" Right. What are you talking about? Right. If that's not love, what is? Right. And so maybe it grows in time, or maybe it's sort of less important than the Jewish values of building a family, of being fruitful and multiply, of passing it down to the next generation, however you do that, right? That there are other things more important than love, or you could say that nothing's more important than love, that, you know, love comes in the, or like it is, I don't know. It's a good debate, but good. And then I want to keep going. Yes.
I share
Yeah.
soulmate. You
Right.
were the for me.
Yeah. Right. No, you can't say that our tradition isn't romantic, even though if we are being honest and going back to the sources, right, it is the exception to the rule. You know, our tradition seems to, it's also like what people say, if you say, what's the core of Christianity? Give me Christianity on one foot. It's, it's a religion of love, right? And if you were to say the same about, sorry, I don't mean to over simplify, right? And what is Judaism on one foot? Although actually that story is love your neighbor as yourself as well, or that which is hateful to you, don't do to your neighbor. But I think if we were to distill Judaism down, it's more of mitzvot. It's more of religion of action, and not that love isn't of primary importance as well, but I think it's more transfixed with what does God want of us? What is the behavior that we're supposed to?
Well, the problem is that things aren't all or nothing. On the other hand, if you want to move a discussion anywhere, you have to find a point of emphasis. So it's a tension and a balancing.
Good. Balancing on the roof. Yeah.
Always have to have a story where she has a tear fall from her eye and the husband dies. You know, what is the other, the time of our story? I mean,
The last one we did, it ended in death too. And they prayed for mercy and he died, right? Because yeah. Well, look, I think that, I think the Talmud deals in extremes a lot, right? To make points. And I don't think you always necessarily have to take these as historically accurate in every sense of that term, right? Like sometimes I do think that the Talmud, like I don't want to even say this. Basically, there's an example where they say because I was looking for this text and found another text that I was familiar with, but hadn't thought about for a while. I probably blocked it out, but it was if somebody if the roof falls off the roof and lands on a woman and impregnates her, what do you, and the Talmud has that discussion, right? And you say to yourself, what? You know, like, how, right? But the Talmud deals with extremes, and it's part of it's part of the beauty of the discussion and the debate is to as tools go to the extreme, not for necessarily the accuracy or the prevalence of something.
Look at this from a romantic, tragic point of view. She sheds a tear because he isn't there, and so she could either be worrying about him, pining for him, both, something else also. But clearly, well, I'm taking the tear not as anger, but as sadness. So if that's the way one would interpret this story, then it's a kind of a tragedy, because the tragedy is she cared for him that much, but he evidently doesn't care for her that much.
Yeah, there certainly seems to be this unrequitedness. Absolutely. And something going back to what Jackie said earlier, then I want to get to Nelson's hand. Or selfishness, right? There's in Bava Metzia, there's a discussion about how the post Second Temple, the gates of prayer have been closed, but the gates of tears are open. Sharei Demaot, that God in God's anger is no longer is right. That's like the gates of at Neila, the gates of heaven closing to everything. That there's a time where God is receptive and a time where God is not. And that the rabbis were saying after the destruction of the Second Temple that the gates of prayer were closed, but that tears God responds to right away. And that's what Jackie was talking about. It also makes me think of Hagar, right? When Abraham and Sarah send Hagar out, that God immediately hears the tears of Hagar and of the boy, Basher Husham, where he is, right? And God, so there is this sense of like, we could pray all we want, but if prayer without real feeling doesn't open the gates, but feeling, even without prayer, right? That has a direct line to God. And then there's Psalm 39, hear my prayer, Lord, and give ear to my pleading. Keep not silent at my tears. Azina el dimati, hear my tears. Okay, Nelson, and then we're gonna move on because we're getting close to the end, and I want to make sure we get there. Everything. Go ahead, Nelson.
I assumed since he always came home on the night before Yom Kippur and he wasn't there, something terrible must have happened to him, which is a reason for her to have a tear. But the point I wanted to make, isn't Yom Kippur in the afternoon when the virgins dance to attract a husband?
Yeah, there is that tradition actually. Yes, of that.
Yeah.
After.
The afternoon.
Right, at the end of Yom Kippur, but still linked to Yom Kippur, yes. But after, and still there's no tradition of sex being permitted on Yom Kippur. But
Don't they also read the Song of Songs?
Hoarding ritual. Go ahead, what'd you say?
Don't they also read the Song of Songs?
They read it that way, right? There was a debate that, well, I don't know if it actually happened historically, but they say that at Yavna, there was this conference where they decided what makes our canon, our sacred literature, and what's out. And Song of Songs was sort of on the chopping block. And but the rabbis interpreted it as, no, this isn't just an erotic story between two lovers. It's an allegory for God's relationship with the people of Israel. And that's what kept it into our canons. Okay, sold. Then it makes it in. Okay, I want us to keep going.
God's relationship with us is also, in that sense, erotic.
Say that again.
God's relationship with us is also.
That's why I'm good. That's why I'm calling this rabbinic love triangles, because I think it's love versus love here. It's not work versus love necessarily. This is love versus love, which is Torah, which is actually also referred to often in the feminine, right? That there's, and in the Zohar, there's all this stuff about like Torah being very erotic and sort of like being like flashing inspiration, like, but only for a moment. And this sort of like, like pining for Torah, and it like is very hard, to pursue and hard to get. So yes, there is this mapping of a romantic relationship onto the pursuit of Torah. Okay, I want to go on to Mishnah now, and this is we're going back in time right now to the Tanaim, to Rabban Gamliel. He was first century in Jerusalem, head of the great Sanhedrin, the Sanhedrin Agadolah. Let's read some stories about him. Who wants to dive in?
I'll do it.
Go for it.
Okay. Rabban Gamliel bathed on the first night after his wife died. His students said to him, "Have you not taught us, our teacher, that a mourner is prohibited to bathe?" He answered them, "I am not like other people. I am delicate."
And it's east and east is the word used there. Weird word, but understood to be delicate.
And when his slave Tavi died, Rabbi Gamliel accepted condolences for his death. His students said to him, "Have you not taught us, our teacher, that one does not accept condolences for the death of slave?" Rabbi Gamliel said to his students, "My slave Tavi is not like all the rest of the slaves. He was virtuous."
I'm just going to pause for 1 second because I love the Hebrew here, which is Ein Tavi Avdi Kishar Kol Havadim, right? My servant Tavi is not like all the other servants. Kasher Haya, he was kosher, right? First of all, I like Kishar, like the others, and Kasher. I don't know if there's wordplay there or not, but he wasn't like the others. He was kosher. He was special. He was one of us. He's family. So therefore, I will observe morning practices for him. Interesting that he does not observe the correct morning practices for his wife because he takes a bath. And you could interpret that a couple ways. One is that he would have been so uncomfortable. He was delicate. He would have been so uncomfortable had he not bathed, that it's therefore okay, because you don't want to be so distracted by how uncomfortable you are that you're not able to mourn. So you can say that by bathing, he was allowing himself to be able to mourn better. Or you could say that he had more stringency for his servant, Tavi, than he did for his wife, if you're reading a little bit more negatively or cynically. Go ahead.
So involved in taking care of his wife that he hadn't had a chance to bathe.
Okay, I like that. Maybe he was so caregiving for so long, he never actually he finally had a moment to take care of himself. Interesting. Okay, keep going. Let's finish this off.
With regard to the recitation of Shema on one's wedding night, the sages said that if a groom wishes to recite Shema on the first night, he may do so. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says not everyone who wishes to assume such a reputation may assume it.
Okay, so let's unpack that. So there's a debate about, does a groom recite Shema on their wedding night? Point is, remember we talked about if you are, ha'osek b'mitzvah patur mina mitzvah, the one who is busy with the mitzvah is exempted from another mitzvah. So would you interrupt your wedding night where you should be just thinking about each other and also consummating the marriage? Would you interrupt that to say the evening Shema, right? And the rabbis say that, you are exempt because you are doing something that is very special and holy. And so you do not have to stop to say the Shema. However, Rabban Gamliel was stringent on this. He said you should say the Shema. So again, this is speaking about this love triangle, right? On this most holy of nights and moments in your love and your relationship, that you are consummating your marriage. Even that is no excuse to not pray to God, right? Because that relationship with God is so important that you should interrupt that in order to say the Shema.
Well, this is his son, presumably.
It is. So now what do we make of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel saying? He's saying, okay, not everyone who wishes to assume such a reputation. I think by that, he means not everyone who wants to be like my dad should. And that you can read in two ways. And there's a professor who just taught me a session. He's a professor of Midrash at NYU. I think Rubenstein is his last name. And Richard Rubenstein, right. He's amazing. And he is reading Mishnah as literature, which is, I was very interested in his session because it's similar to what we're trying to do in this course. And he says this is a whole new meaning if you read it as literature, meaning if you apply our structures and tools for reading literature to the study of Mishnah, which is that don't just read this as, what is the halakha or what are we trying to get, but read this as you would literature. And if you connect the dots here, something really interesting is happening, which is when Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says not everyone should be like my dad, you could read it one of two ways again. One being, my dad was really, really special. Okay. And not everyone can or should live up to his stringencies, right? It would be unrealistic to expect that everyone interrupt their wedding night to say the Shema. You don't need to. Don't try to be like him, right? That's one way, a loving son, right? There's another way to read it, which is he is not just Rabban Gamliel's son. He is also the son of his mother, saying, not everyone should be like my dad. Right? My dad who bathed on my mother's Shiva and didn't fully do Shiva correctly, but did for his slave. And back then, the legal status of women and slaves were similar. Right? Again, we're dealing with this beautiful but ancient tradition that has things that don't strike us as right in the modern age. But that was the case. And here finally saying that he also interrupted their wedding night to say Shema, right? So I think that brings new light, applying that lens of reading this as a story that is connected.
I think there's another point here is he's admitting that he's not as good as his father. He himself isn't as good.
Good. So maybe saying, I shouldn't be expected to live up
Right.
to that. Go ahead.
There's another thing, if we want to read this in light of some of the other things we've studied, even though Rabban Gamliel is Rabban Gamliel, he is ultimately too rigid.
Mm.
And even he can't live up to his own rigidity. And we've seen the consequences to him already in a different story, but if we connect the dots, which maybe we would do if we treated as literature, I can imagine somebody writing an interesting novel. It wouldn't be me. We'd be asleep already after the first page. But if you connect those dots, then again, it's a kind of a tragedy of hubris in a sense.
Good. That's great. So David is connecting back to our previous session where we talked about the new moon, declaring the new moon. And Rabbi Yehoshua believed it was a different day than Rabban Gamliel believed. And Rabban Gamliel made him carry his walking stick and his money bag on the day that Rabbi Yehoshua thought was Rosh Chodesh, basically desecrating Rosh Chodesh, right? Or Yom Kippur, the day he thought was Yom Kippur, based on when Rosh Chodesh was, right? So he was having him desecrate the day he thought was Yom Kippur, speaking to Rabban Gamliel's rigidity. And how that ultimately backfired because he was then removed from his post. So like the roof collapsing or the floor, or the carpet being pulled from beneath him. Good, Shira. And then Helene.
What I'm kind of getting from this is he says, I am not like other people. There is there kind of a narcissism here that I'm special, that this doesn't apply to me. And then he says, when the slave dies, well, I have a special reason because I have this special slave Tavi. So there is, I think it's kind of the hubris and maybe a bit of conceit that may have even applied to Rav Rahumi. He doesn't have to think about his wife. He can go up on the roof and, be studying.
Good. Yeah. Absolutely. Good. That absolutely connects all that. Yeah, Helena?
It sounded a little bit conceited and set.
Yeah.
But on another point is, there is a saying in Hebrew, לא הקפדן מלמד ולא הביישן לומד, which I translated. The one who is too rigid, cannot teach, and the one who is too shy cannot learn because he is afraid to ask questions
Right.
he doesn't know.
I love that. So that again brings us back to balance, right? Which has been permeating this discussion of what is the right balance and what are the extremes. I want to move on to now how this was a speech given by Ruth Calderon. Is anyone familiar with Ruth Calderon? She was a member of Knesset between 2013, 2015, Israeli parliament. She was born in Tel Aviv in 1961. Really interesting background. She had a Sephardic father and an Ashkenazic mother. She says that she was grew up in a household that was very Jewish, very Zionist, secular, traditional, religious home. So she's like all of these paradoxes and contradictions. Secular, traditional, religious home that combined Ashkenaz and Serafad, Beitar and Hashomer Hatzair. So Beitar is Jabotinsky, the revisionist, very militaristic, and Hashomer Hatzair is socialist, right? So she's got all of these, she contains multitudes, right? She is very eclectic. She got her doctorate, she's a melting pot, yeah. She got her doctorate in Talmud from the Hebrew University, Jerusalem. And in 1986, she established the first Israeli secular, pluralistic, and egalitarian Beit Midrash, which is phenomenal in Israel, right? Basically, yeah, an egalitarian yeshiva. Okay, so she's got this speech. I want us to read it, though I also brought a video of her delivering it in the Knesset. But this is just at the very end of her speech, and I want us to actually read it so we get more of it. So does somebody want to read Ruth Calderon's speech? Please, go ahead, Sherry, thanks.
I missed that I lacked words for my vocabulary. The past, epics, heroes, places, drama, stories were missing. I did not know how to fill that void, but when I first encountered the Talmud and became completely enamored with it, its language, its humor, its profound thinking, its modes of discussion, and the practicality, humanity, and maturity that emerged from its lines, I sensed that I had found the love of my life, what I had been lacking.
Okay, pause real quick. So notice the love of my life, right? I had found the love of my life. And by this is called the Talmud lesson in the Knesset. She had brought her Bavli into the Knesset and was referring to it. Okay, go ahead, keep going. And by the way, okay, no, just keep going. The Torah.
The Torah is not the property of one movement or another. It is a gift that every one of us received, and we have all been granted the opportunity to meditate upon it as we create the realities of our lives. Nobody took the Talmud and rabbinic literature from us. We gave it away with our own hands when it seemed that another task was more important and urgent: building a state, raising an army, developing agriculture and industry, etc. The time has come to reappropriate what is ours, to delight in the cultural riches that wait for us, for our eyes and imaginations, our creativity.
Real quick again, sorry to keep interrupting, but I think what she's speaking to here is pluralism in Israel, right? David Ben-Gurion sort of made this gamble with the Orthodox that they could have the overall authority on religious matters in Israel in exchange for their political vote, which he needed at that time. But so I think that's what she's referring to when she says that we gave it away with our own hands, this sort of control over what Jewish expression looks like, at least the authority, the power center of it in Israel, but that it nothing says it should be that way. And that's sort of at least certainly where the conservative movement, where we come into it, that it should be egalitarian. But okay, keep going.
What can I do to this place? First, I learned one who forgets that he is sitting in the shoulders will fall. I learned that righteousness is not adherence to the Torah at the expense of sensitivity to human beings. I learned that often in a dispute, both sides are right. And until I understand that both my disputant and I, both the woman and Rabbi Rafumi, feel that they are doing the right thing and are responsible for the home, I am not seeing things fully. Sometimes we feel like the woman, waiting, serving in the army, doing all the work while others sit on the roof and say, sometimes those others feel that they bear the entire weight of tradition, Torah, and our culture, while we go to the beach and have a blast. Both disputant and I feel solely responsible for the home. Until I understand this, I will not perceive the problem properly and will not be able to find a solution. I invite all of us to years of action rooted in thought and dispute rooted in mutual respect and understanding. I aspire to bring about a situation in which Torah study is the heritage of all Israel, in which the Torah is accessible to all who wish to study it, in which all young citizens of Israel take part in Torah study as well as military and civil service. Together, we will build this home and avoid disappointment.
Amen, amen. Amen. That's where I want to end with this notion that there's a danger when we get into this mindset that only one of us is responsible for sustaining the home, building the home and keeping it. That building and sustaining and keeping a home is a partnership, is a loving marriage of different peoples, of different backgrounds, of different experiences, but it is on all of us. And if we forget whose shoulders we are resting on, right, the way the Rabbi Ruchmei forgot that he was on her shoulders, that he couldn't have done this without her, right? That if you go at it alone and think that you're alone in this, that the roof caves in and collapses. So I want to bless us that in coming off of this secular period of love, Valentine's Day, which we do not celebrate nor mention that we can be inspired and renew our love to being Am Yisrael, a community, people of Israel, that we who are enmeshed in this love triangle, love of Torah, love of humanity, not compromise our love of human beings for the sake of our Torah study, but that our Torah study fuels our love of humanity and of one another. So thank you, everyone, as always, for learning together.